Hey, it's me, Justin, and this is the second episode of Baldilox Talks, where we talk about nerdy stuff and video games every week. And this week I wanted to talk about two things that suck. The first thing is that me, Teddy, and Matt recorded the first ever episode of the Leftover Pants podcast this week, and it was awesome, and it was about 2 hours long before we got about maybe halfway through. And when we went to edit the video, we found out that the file got immediately corrupted somehow between the camera and the computer. So, unfortunately, the first episode won't be coming out this week, which really sucks because we had a hell of a thing going. So, unfortunately, the first episode won't be out anytime soon. But when Teddy gets back in town, we'll definitely record the first episode with fresh news topics, and we'll get the ball moving. The second thing that sucks that I actually want to take a few minutes to talk about this week is that a couple days ago, Nintendo took made the odd decision to discontinue the NES Classic Edition in America, Japan, and Europe, so pretty much all over the world, which is unfortunate. If you didn't know what it is, it's basically a micro console. Like, you know how Sega and Atari makes those really cheap $50 micro consoles that are in Target and everything, and they have a bunch of games bundled in that's saved on like a flash drive or something. Well, Nintendo made a really good, really high quality version of the NES with 30 built-in games. It came out last fall, and it was kind of their Christmas novelty item. And apparently they really underestimated demand for the product because nobody could get one. They could have sold probably 3 or 4 million units worldwide for a console that came out in 1985, but they underestimated the nostalgia that the product brought, at least to the States. It was really cool too because it didn't just come with first-party Nintendo games. Like, yeah, it came with Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, and The Legend of Zelda, and all that cool stuff. But it also came with a bunch of third-party licensed games, like, well, not licensed games, but third-party games like Castlevania and Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, Balloon Fight, which I actually think was made by Nintendo, but here's the full list of games, actually. We got Balloon Fight, that is a Nintendo property, but Castlevania, Donkey Kong, Double Dragon 2, The Revenge, Dr. Mario, Excitebike, Galaga, Ghosts and Goblins, Gradius, Ice Climber, Kirby's Adventure, Mario Brothers, Megaman 2, Metroid, Ninja Gaiden, Pac-Man, Super Contra, Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Bubble Bobble, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, Donkey Kong Jr., Final Fantasy, Kid Icarus, Punch Out featuring Mr. Dream, not Mike Tyson, Star Tropics, Tecmo Bowl, and overseas it had a couple of different games, but it was really cool, and it was a really nostalgia-driven product that a lot of lapsed Nintendo fans and lapsed gamers, in addition to hardcore gamers like myself and my friends, really wanted to grab one. It was only $60, and it was a pretty easy buy, honestly. It was $2 a game. Not only did it have a lot of bundled games with it, which was pretty neat, but it was super authentic too. It ran through an HDMI cord, so you could use it with modern TVs. It wasn't just a regular AV setup. And it actually used the original molds for the original NES controllers. This is one of the new ones. It felt exactly like it did in 1985. The micro console also features like save states, kind of like ROMs, so that even back in the day for games that didn't have saves or battery built-in saves, you could actually just save your spot if you got really far without dying or whatever, and probably beat some of the old games that you couldn't back in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, what I really wanted to talk about was that they discontinued it in America, and this week they said pretty much the end of April is their final shipments going out to retailers, and it would be your last chance to get one. And that kind of sucks because not only are there Switch shortages in America and all over the world really, but now this little nostalgia product that sells for $60 at retail is going for $300, $400, $500 on eBay and Amazon, and scalpers are really just grabbing them up to try to make a buck. Well, some hardcore fans, or like I said, lapsed fans like ourselves, we don't really get to play it. So I did not have one, but Best Buy announced this week that they were going to get a limited number at the beginning of business, sometime this week, I forget which day. So anyway, I went there on the off chance that I might be able to get one, and out of a line of 10 or 15 people, I was the only one that got one, and that's because I was first in line. So after I survived the angry mob that was not too happy that they didn't get an NES Classic, I actually grabbed one. Now, as you can see behind me, I actually have a lot of the original NES cards I've been collecting since they came out, really, since I was really young. But I really wanted one because now there's rumors coming out that either Nintendo would make an NES Classic version 2 with more games at the end of 2017 or later. Or this new rumor suggesting that they're actually turning it into a series where they're going to make a Super NES Classic Edition in time for Christmas. So basically, what I wanted to talk about was just the NES Classic and maybe what could be for the SNES Classic, considering it was an era that I grew up in. So now I'm probably just going to ramble for a few minutes about what the games meant to me, and hopefully in the comments below or something you can tell me what games were important to you on an NES Classic. If you got an NES Classic Edition, or if you just broke out the original Nintendo recently and had a little nostalgia play fest for yourself. So of course, pretty much everybody's favorite on the NES library would be Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3. Those were the most classic games that came in the late 80s. Mario Brothers came out in 85, obviously I was not alive yet. I was born in 86, but I remember going to my cousin's house next door and playing Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3 and the original Donkey Kong Trilogy. And she pretty much got me into gaming. I doubt she's watching this, but thank you, Tim. Yeah, so we used to go in her mother and father's bedroom, and Bowser's getting comfortable in the corner. And she introduced me to Super Mario Brothers and the magic that was Nintendo. I think I only beat the original Mario Brothers once, actually. Probably when I was closer to 8 or 9 years old when I got better at games. But Mario Brothers 2 I always thought was really cool because obviously now we know it was originally called Doki Doki Panic in Japan, and it wasn't really developed as a Mario game, but Nintendo of Japan just put Mario characters in it to make it appeal more to Western audiences in the late 80s. But I thought it was cool because when you jumped on enemies, you didn't kill them and you'd have to pick them up, and it added a completely different mechanic to the series, which never really returned, unfortunately. It was kind of weird during the NES era that a lot of the sequels, the number 2s, were drastically different than their predecessors. Like Mario Brothers 2 obviously didn't have much to do with Mario Brothers 1 other than the brothers appearing in the game. It was cool that you could play as Princess Toadstool as well, but like Zelda 2 was a side-scroller with RPG mechanics. You could actually level up in the game, and there were a couple different... We took a timeout here because Bowser needed to growl. He needed to get something off his chest, right? So I thought that was cool. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, actually. A lot of people didn't like that one as much because it was more of an RPG and they introduced NPCs to the game, which is pretty cool, but I never got too far into Castlevania 2. Super Contra and Megaman 2, they were mostly the same as the original, just a little bit better, arguably. Ninja Gaiden 2 as well, which wasn't on this collection, unfortunately. But, yeah, so the games that were on this list was actually kind of a who's who and what's what of the NES library, but there were a couple games missing. Like, I thought it was weird how Mega Man 2 was the only Mega Man on there, even though the first 6 largely had the same mechanics for the most part. And 2 is probably the most famous one, but a lot of people like 3 better. Tetris, the original Tetris, which was probably a rights issue with EA, who I believe owns the franchise at this point with the Tetris company. But Tetris had so much to do with the success of Nintendo in the mid-80s, especially with the launch of the Game Boy, and it was also on NES, and Tetris 2 came out on both systems, and the SNES. I thought it was weird that Tetris wasn't on here, but Dr. Mario was. It had Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., but not Donkey Kong 3, which I thought was kind of odd. Why you shouldn't just put the original on. Donkey Kong Jr. was actually cool, but. And then it had Castlevania and Castlevania 2, but I loved Castlevania 3. I thought that was probably the strongest of the original trilogy. And then, yeah, it had a lot of third-party games, too, like Final Fantasy, which was obviously a great pick to put in there. I'm glad that Square-Enix showed their support. But I thought Pac-Man was an odd inclusion. I'm glad Namco decided to put something on the system. Including in this collection, but yeah, Pac-Man, I mean, it's Pac-Man. It's been released and re-released 1,000 times, but it's still kind of a cool item to have on the collection. Also, there's some glaring omissions that weren't on here, like Konami obviously showed their support with the Castlevania games, but Super Contra was on there, but not the original Contra, and for some reason the original Metal Gear wasn't on there. I understand why Snake Eater, or not Snake Eater, but the second Metal Gear 2 wasn't on there. But Metal Gear 1 should have been on there, really. And finally, just to wrap up, I know that some of the licensed games, like Batman and Batman 2 Return of the Joker, it was probably more trouble than Nintendo felt was worth to go through to get the IP to put on the console. But those were cool games that I grew up with that I thought were awesome, that weren't represented here. But really, there's two that I want to talk about that, yeah, they probably never would have been on the console anyway, at least the new edition, for much the same reason. But the first one was Battletoads. Absolute classic. Yes, I know Rare is owned by Microsoft now, but Microsoft and Nintendo have shown a willingness to work with each other in the past. After Nintendo passed on purchasing the rest of the stock or majority stock in Rare in the early 2000s, Microsoft purchased it, but they were still allowed to make games for Nintendo systems, like Diddy Kong Racing DS. There was an exclusive Viva Pinata sequel for the original DS, I believe. So I was wondering why the Battletoads, which were already re-released on Rare Replay, what would it hurt to have the original Battletoads on the NES Classic, considering that was one of the most classic NES games of all time? And the second one, the final one, again, I understand that it would probably never happen, but it would be perfect timing, was a game that I think was highly, highly underrated. History was not kind to it, and a lot of people honestly bash it without ever playing it, but the original Friday the 13th. Destroy Jason if you can. I actually think it was a highly underrated game for the NES. Yeah, it was back before strategy guides were commonplace, and you didn't really know what you were doing in these different games unless you played the games over and over again and used trial and error. But Friday the 13th was really cool. It was set up so that it wasn't based on any of the particular Friday the 13th movies, but basically you had a world map set up that was a little confusing, where you had, I think, 6 or so camp counselors that you could switch between at any time. And the goal of the game was to get to all of the log cabins on the map in Camp Crystal Lake and light the fireplace to create safe houses. And not knowing where Jason is, the 6 counselors were basically your 6 lives that you had to beat the whole game. And long story short, an alarm would sound if one of the camp counselors that you weren't playing as got attacked by Jason, and the goal would be to go to save them before they died, or else you lost a life. And the game is over if he kills all the camp counselors. Anyway, I never really got far enough. I might have once to stop Jason and light up all the fireplaces. But if you do, you're actually directed to go further into the woods to Jason's hideout, and the final boss is to face Jason's mom's decapitated head, which, yeah, but Castlevania is in here too, so don't give me anything about violent games can't be on the NES Classic, because Castlevania and Contra are on there, so it wasn't that bad. But anyway, I thought it was a cool game that warranted a re-release, especially considering Friday the 13th, the game, is coming to PC, PS4, and Xbox One next month in May 2017. Oh, and one last one would be the original Ninja Turtles trilogy. Even though those games were really ultra hard, nothing screams 80s like Nintendo and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And those first 3 games were hugely instrumental in Nintendo's success. They even had a Ninja Turtles themed NES bundle back in the late 80s that contained the original game bundled instead of Super Mario Brothers. So I think that would have been wicked cool to have in the NES Classic Edition bundle. Even though, yes, again, there's rights issues considering Konami made the games and Nickelodeon now owns the franchise. And I think Ubisoft makes the games today, so that's probably why they're doing it. So I wanted to end this episode with a kind of a retrospective or a wish list of the Super NES, which you can see on my right. What games we would like to have in an SNES Classic, which I'm pretty sure is going to come this fall, and I'll do anything I can to grab one. But I believe Teddy expressed interest in making a video like that, so we'll make a sequel to this episode pretty soon, and we'll kind of have an SNES retrospective and a wish list for the SNES Classic Edition, which may or may not exist and come out this fall. So thanks for watching, and let me know if you grabbed an NES Classic or if you wanted one, and if you're willing to hunt on eBay or Amazon for one, which is doubtful, but depends on how much of a Nintendo fan you are, I guess. Well, thanks for watching.